Before we begin, tell me, where in this wide, wild world are you listening from? Drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing just how far these Wild West tales can travel. And make sure you watch this video all the way to the end. Because if you don't, something terrible is going to happen. The first sound wasn't her voice. It was the whistle of the wind through the dry grass, the scrape of a boot against the cracked wooden planks of Dry Creek. Then came the faint whimper of a child, almost swallowed by the desert heat, almost lost to the wide, cruel world. Eli Callahan rode hard into the town just as the first rays of dawn cut across the horizon. The prairie was a sea of gold, the wind whipping dust against his weathered coat, flapping the edges like tattered flags. His horse's hooves clattered against the wooden bridge near the creek, raising the first swirl of dust that would soon drift over the empty streets. He wasn't chasing fame, fortune, or revenge. Eli was a man who had seen too many lives destroyed by greed and cruelty. Yet something about this morning felt different. He couldn't explain why the dust smelled sharper, why the silence of Dry Creek pressed against his chest like a warning. It was near the old stable, leaning against a fence broken in places by weather and neglect, that he saw them. Two children, no older than 10 and 7, tied together with rough rope. Their clothes were torn, dirt-smudged, and damp with sweat. The rope cut into their wrists, and their small bodies trembled as if the very air around them carried their torment. Clara. Tommy. Eli whispered their names softly, not wanting to startle them, but needing them to hear. His voice was a gravelly contrast to the quiet town, seasoned by years on the plains, hardened by bitter winds and lonely nights. The children looked up at him with eyes wide and terrified. Clara, older by just a few years, swallowed her sobs and tried to shield her younger brother, who clung to her side like a shadow. You can't save us," Clara whispered, voice thin, brittle. "They'll come back. They'll kill us." Eli didn't flinch. He knelt beside them, gently brushing dust from their hair, untangling the ropes that cut into their skin. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Not today. Not ever. You're both my family now." The wind carried the faint clatter of a wagon wheel turning a corner, and his jaw tightened. Jed Rourke's men, merciless men known across these parts for trading in lives rather than livestock, were already closing in. Eli's pulse raced, but his hands stayed steady. The children's lives rested entirely in his grasp. He worked quickly, cutting the ropes and lifting Clara and Tommy onto his horse. Tommy's small hands gripped Eli's coat, while Clara's face buried into his shoulder. The horse bolted as he kicked the spurs lightly, moving them out of town and into the wide-open plains. Dust rose in clouds behind them, but Eli did not look back. Not yet. Hours passed. The sun climbed mercilessly over the prairie, baking the land, burning the dust into their throats and eyes. The children barely spoke, too exhausted from fear, pain, and the ride. Eli offered what water he had in his canteen, small sips that barely touched their parched throats, but kept them alive. Finally, he slowed near the edge of a Dry Creek bed, shaded by a crooked oak tree. He set the children down, letting them breathe, examining their bruises and scratches. "We're not out of this yet," he said. "But you're alive, and that's the start." Clara looked up at him, green eyes sharp despite tears. Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Eli stared at the earth for a long moment before meeting her gaze. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to be left behind. And I can't let that happen to you too." The prairie stretched endlessly, the wind blowing through the dry grass and carrying the faint scent of sage. Somewhere far behind them, hoofbeats echoed, a reminder that the danger was not over. Rourke's men would not give up easily. Eli's hands tightened on the horse's reins. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing against him. Every decision he made from this point forward would determine the children's fate. Night fell. The prairie turned cold, shadows stretching across the golden plains. Eli built a small fire, careful to keep it low so as not to attract attention. He wrapped Clara and Tommy in his coat, pulling them close. Their small bodies shook from exhaustion and lingering terror. He whispered stories, old tales of brave cowboys and clever escapes, trying to fill the night with something other than fear. Every rustle of wind, every distant howl of a coyote, made the children flinch. But Eli remained calm, a rock in the storm. He whispered, "Sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." The first part of their journey was over, but the road ahead promised more peril, more trials, and more decisions that would test Eli's courage and determination. The prairie had claimed many lives, and the children had narrowly escaped becoming another tragic tale. But tonight, in the shadow of a crooked oak, they were alive. And in the vast, dusty, unforgiving west, that was everything. The prairie never slept. Even under the moon's cold glow, the wind whispered secrets through the tall, dry grass. Eli Callahan had kept the fire low, the children wrapped tightly against him. He had hoped that night would pass quietly, that Rourke's men would not follow so soon. But the West had a way of making even the quietest moments dangerous. Before dawn, Eli had already saddled his horse again. Clara stirred, her small hands clutching the rough edges of his coat. Tommy rubbed his eyes, his innocence clashing with the terror he had felt the day before. Eli offered a soft smile, though his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. "We move fast. Stay close, don't speak unless I tell you. You'll thank me later." The first hoofbeats came like a shadow from the past. Eli had barely mounted when he spotted 3 figures racing across the horizon, dust trailing behind them. Rourke's men. They weren't far enough to strike immediately, but close enough to make Eli's stomach tighten. He nudged his horse forward, kicking up dust that swirled like ghosts around them. "Don't look back," he whispered, more to himself than to the children. He could feel their fear, the tension radiating from their small bodies. Clara tightened her grip on his shoulder. "They'll catch us," she whispered. "They won't," he replied, voice steady, but the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew these men well, cowards, yes, but cunning and relentless. And they would not stop until they had what they believed was theirs. The ride stretched on, the prairie fading into rolling hills and rocky outcrops. Eli guided them through narrow passes where a larger group couldn't easily follow. He forced the children to stay low, moving quietly, letting the wind and the shadows hide them. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of movement made Clara's heart jump, and Tommy's small frame shivered beside her. Hours passed. Hunger gnawed at them, and thirst burned deep in their throats, but Eli's determination never faltered. He shared small sips of water, scraps of dried meat from his saddlebags, all while scanning the horizon. The sun rose high, harsh and unrelenting, and the wind carried the faint clatter of hooves behind them. The men were still chasing, still relentless. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon, the walls rising like jagged teeth against the sky. Eli slowed the horse, urging the children to stay low behind a rocky outcrop. The canyon offered cover, but it also limited their escape routes. "They'll come," Clara whispered, eyes wide and glistening with fear. "They'll have to follow carefully," Eli replied. "And if they make a mistake, well, we'll be ready." The ambush came from the shadows. 2 men stepped from behind a rock, pistols raised, eyes gleaming with cruelty. Eli acted without hesitation. His own Colt flashed in the sunlight. The first shot rang out, echoing between the canyon walls, startling the children. Dust rose as the bullets found their marks, and the men staggered back. One fell, clutching his side, while the other ducked behind a boulder, cursing. "Keep low!" Eli shouted, pulling the children behind him. They pressed against the rock, their hearts racing, their breaths coming in sharp gasps. Tommy's small hand gripped Eli's arm, and Clara pressed her face against his shoulder, trembling. The man behind the boulder fired again. Eli deflected with a careful shot, missing only by inches. "We're not out of this yet," he muttered under his breath, scanning the shadows for the next threat. The children could hear his voice, calm but firm, like an anchor in the storm. Hours passed in a tense standoff. The men tried to flank them, circling the canyon, but Eli's knowledge of the land gave him the advantage. He led the children through a hidden path, a narrow ledge above a drop that would have broken any pursuer foolish enough to follow. By evening, they had crossed the canyon and reached a small grove near a hidden stream. Eli dismounted, setting the children down carefully. They were exhausted, dirt-smeared, bruised, but alive. "Rest," he said, lowering his voice. "I'll keep watch." The night was thick with shadows and whispers. The stream gurgled softly, a lullaby against the fear that had clung to the children since sunrise. Clara and Tommy slept in fits and starts, their dreams haunted by the men who had sold them, the cruelty that had forced them into Eli's path. Eli sat nearby, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the tree line. Every rustle made his pulse spike. But even in the tense quiet, he felt something shift inside him. These children weren't just strangers in need, they were the spark he had been waiting for, a reason to stand against a world that too often rewarded cruelty and punished the innocent. Hours later, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the silence. Not Rourke's men, this was faster, more urgent. Eli's gaze shot toward the ridge. A single rider, silhouette sharp against the moon, approached at speed. The rider pulled alongside him, pulling off a wide-brimmed hat. It was Sam Harlow, an old friend and tracker who owed Eli a debt from years past. "Eli," Sam said, breathless. "They'll be here soon. We've got maybe an hour before the rest of Rourke's crew closes in." Eli nodded, heart heavy. "Then we make them regret ever thinking they could take these kids." Together, they devised a plan. The children would stay hidden while the men set a trap in the open plain, a bluff to make Rourke's men think Eli had fled. Candles would be lit in the cabin by the river, shadows dancing, suggesting more people than there were. And if Rourke's men were foolish enough to charge, well, Eli and Sam would be ready. As dawn approached, the prairie was alive with tension. Every rock, every ridge, every gust of wind carried the potential for discovery, for disaster. The children woke, still trembling, but Eli's presence gave them courage. "We're going to be all right," he whispered. "I promise. Stay close, no matter what you hear." The first men came at sunrise. Their shadows stretched long across the plain. Eli and Sam were ready. Horses kicked up dust, rifles gleamed, and the canyon echoed with the first warning shots. Chaos erupted. Rourke's men were not prepared for the strategy, not ready for the fire and precision that met them. Horses reared, men shouted, dust swallowed their figures, and Eli's heart pounded like a war drum. Through it all, he could hear Clara's soft whispers, Tommy's small gasps. They were terrified, but alive. And in that moment, Eli understood the truth of the West. Survival was not just about guns and horses, it was about courage, cunning, and the willingness to risk everything for those who could not protect themselves. As the sun climbed high over the horizon, the last of Rourke's men retreated. Eli and Sam emerged from the shadows, dust-covered, worn, but victorious. The children clung to Eli, their tears and laughter mingling in the morning light. "Thank you," Clara whispered, voice shaky but full of relief. I thought we'd never." Eli pressed a hand to her shoulder. "No one touches my family. Not ever." The prairie was quiet once more, but the horizon hinted at further dangers. Rourke would not forget. Rourke would not forgive. And Eli knew the real battle, protecting the children, keeping them safe, guiding them toward a life free of the cruelty they had known, was only just beginning. The morning sun spilled across the prairie like liquid gold. Dust still hung in the air from yesterday's chaos, but the horizon promised something rarer than survival, hope. Clara and Tommy huddled against Eli Callahan, exhausted but alive, their small hands clutching his coat like lifelines. The last of Rourke's men had disappeared into the distance, but their threat lingered like a shadow on the plains. Eli knew this victory was temporary, vengeance and greed were persistent, and Rourke's kind never forgave. But for now, he allowed himself a rare, brief moment of peace. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, voice trembling but curious. Eli looked toward the distant hills, where the land flattened into a narrow valley dotted with cottonwoods and a sparkling creek. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't touch you." The ride was slow and careful. Eli had learned from years on the frontier that speed could be fatal, and stealth was often the difference between life and death. Clara and Tommy rode close behind him, their small frames nearly swallowed by his coat. Every mile carried them farther from Rourke, but also deeper into a world they had never known, a world that could be kind. By midday, they reached a small, weathered ranch tucked into a bend of the Rio Verde. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, and horses grazed quietly in the pasture. The rancher, Cal Turner, a grizzled man with silver-streaked hair and a scar across his left cheek, met Eli at the gate. "You brought trouble," Cal said, voice low but not unkind. His eyes swept over the children, and then softened. "Or maybe, salvation." Eli nodded. "They need shelter. And protection. Can you help?" Cal studied them carefully. Clara's dirt-streaked face, bruised arms, the haunted look in her eyes. Tommy's small, trembling hands. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. "Come in. We'll make it work." Inside the modest cabin, Eli set the children down on a rough blanket. Water and simple food were brought, and for the first time, Clara and Tommy felt the weight of fear lighten. The hours passed slowly, but for once, there was no terror in their world, just the quiet rhythm of survival and care. Eli moved among them, cleaning wounds, bandaging scratches, offering gentle words. Clara finally spoke her name. "I'm Clara. And this is my brother, Tommy." Her voice was small but clear. Eli smiled faintly. "And I'm Eli. You're safe now. That's all that matters." But the safety was fragile. Word would reach Rourke, and he would not be pleased. Eli knew that one day soon, he would have to face the man who had caused so much pain. Yet he also knew that these children, for the first time, had a chance to grow up without fear. Days passed. The children began to eat properly, sleep without trembling, laugh softly in moments of quiet relief. Eli watched over them, teaching them to ride, to care for the small herd of horses, to respect the land that now sheltered them. And in the quiet moments, when Clara's green eyes met his, Eli saw something he hadn't expected, a spark of trust, a fragile flicker of hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in fire and gold, Eli gathered the children near the creek. "I'm going to tell you something important," he said. "The world is often cruel, and there are men who will try to take what isn't theirs. But there are also people who will fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That's what you must remember." Clara's voice trembled. "Will they come for us again?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Maybe. But I promise you this, as long as I'm here, no one will ever take you again. You're my family now." That night, the children slept soundly for the first time, their breathing steady, their bodies finally able to relax. Eli sat outside, rifle across his lap, staring at the stars. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere out there, Rourke would be planning, scheming, waiting for revenge. But Eli had already anticipated it. And if the man came, he would face not just one determined cowboy, but the will of two children who had learned courage in the face of terror. Weeks later, word of Rourke's actions had spread across the frontier, but instead of fear, it brought allies. Cal Turner's network of former soldiers, neighbors who had seen too much cruelty to stay silent, rallied quietly. They brought supplies, offered intelligence, and prepared to stand should Rourke try to reclaim his victims. One afternoon, as Clara and Tommy helped Eli mend a fence, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. The children froze. Eli's eyes narrowed. "Stay calm," he said. His hand rested on the rifle strapped across his back. The dust grew nearer, the sound of hooves unmistakable. But this time, it was not Rourke's men. It was a messenger from Moity, a man with a folded note in hand, face pale and eyes wide with urgency. "Rourke, he's gone. Word is, he's been arrested at Fort Stanton." The law finally caught up to him. Clara and Tommy stared at Eli, disbelief written across their young faces. Relief mingled with shock, tears welling in Clara's eyes. "It's over," she whispered. Eli nodded. For now. But remember what you've learned. Courage, trust, and the knowledge that even in the darkest places, someone will stand for you if you allow them." The children laughed softly, tentative at first, then more freely as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The prairie stretched endless around them, but for the first time, it felt like a home, not a prison. Years later, the story of Eli Callahan and the children he saved would become a whispered legend along the Texas plains. Travelers spoke of a cowboy who would risk everything to protect the innocent, of a small valley where children learned to laugh again, and of a man who had discovered that family was not always born, it was made through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering care. One evening, as the wind rolled across the hills and the fire in the cabin crackled softly, Clara looked at Eli. "You saved us," she said quietly, voice full of awe and gratitude. Eli shook his head. "No, Clara. You saved yourselves. I just gave you a chance." Tommy, now taller, stronger, brushed dirt from his coat and smiled. "We'll never forget. We'll make sure no one forgets." Eli nodded, watching the stars blink awake above the prairie. The West was still wide, wild, and dangerous, but here, in this small valley, courage and kindness had planted roots. And for those who had endured the cruelty of men like Rourke, it was proof that survival was not enough. Sometimes, survival could become freedom, family, and hope. As the firelight flickered across their faces, Eli whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "In a world that often forgets the helpless, it's not enough to ride away. Sometimes, you have to stand, and protect. And that changes history."